Shields are fun, I never used to like them when I was a kid because it always felt like I'm turning down the giant two-handed weapon. But as you get older, you realize that there is a virtue to wielding a shield. And in the same train of thought, these shields have been so much fun to draw as I've been moving through this. Welcome to another sketchbook session. This one was not supposed to be a part 2, but I got so far into the last one and it went pretty well, so here we are again. I'm continuing to work on these devices and trying to figure out how I'm going to solve all these problems that I created for myself. I keep coming back to these drawings, to all of these shields and knives and swords, and I have to complete the pages. I don't have to do this with all my drawings. There are many pages in this particular sketchbook that have all kinds of drawings that are half finished, even sometimes inked and then half filled in. And others where I have one or two sketches on a page and then just didn't want to see them again, so I've walked away. But for some reason with these, I have a lot of joy and I have a lot of fun in the completing of the page and going back and kind of sorting through all the pieces. I'm not 100% sure why that is. I think that there's a good chance that it's the unknown, that when I start a page like this, I don't really know where I'm going. I start with a bunch of shapes and then I start to slowly fill them in. What you're looking at right now is this kind of intriguing middle stage where things are starting to come along. Things are starting to look interesting. They're starting to take some form and to coalesce. But prior to this, and if you looked at the last session, you would see this, the drawings are not particularly interesting until they are. I think this is true more often than we want to admit, especially when it comes to paintings, and especially perhaps watercolor paintings. Anything that requires layers of work takes a long time to look correct, and it's really unsatisfying as a newbie artist. As you start to work through things, it feels very discouraging because things are taking a long time to come along. They're taking a long time to look the way that you want them to look. This sword that I'm working on right now, this pink one in the center of the page, didn't look good last session. I wasn't even sure when I laid down the initial shapes if I would be able to devise something that looks intriguing. But here, as I put the highlights on it with this white gel pen, it starts to take form, it starts to become interesting, it starts to have a life of its own. I didn't know for certain that that would happen. If you are a new artist and you're starting to work through things like this, or even if you're just new to an art form, that can be really discouraging. Now, I had reason to assume that it would coalesce into something at least intriguing. I didn't know that it would end up looking as cool as it did. And that happens with a lot of the drawings on here, but not all of them. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's really important to have pages like this that are just strewn with different drawings of different kinds. Because even if a couple of these don't turn out well, the chances of something on this page turning out well are huge. So I'm just picking and pulling things apart, trying to figure out what I'm doing. And it's really encouraging to come back to a page filled with things like this and to pick it up. I don't know about y'all, but I don't like necessarily working on one thing start to finish. So a really good example of this is when I'm cooking, and I do a lot of cooking. I don't like doing the dishes immediately after I finish cooking. It feels so tangential to what I was doing. And it's not a great trait because sometimes I'll dirty everything in the kitchen because I'm really thinking about what I want to cook and how I want to have it turn out. I'm not thinking about the task later on of having to clean up. I do the same thing with art projects where I'll sometimes come back into the studio afterwards and be like, goodness, I wish a different me would have done this. But I don't mind doing dishes. I don't mind cleaning. But I really hate doing it right after I finished cooking. And I think maybe I function that way artistically as well. I don't like mapping out where all of my swords are going to be on a page and then immediately diving into working on the brush pen. I like to lay it out and then come back to it later. In my writing, I do the same thing. I'll usually start with one of two different stages, depending on what I'm writing. If I'm scripting a video, I'll often start with a really loose set of ideas of what I want to cover, and then I'll walk away from that and I'll do something else. When I come back to it, then I'll devise an outline, and then usually I walk away from the outline as well and come back to it another time and actually start scripting things out. When I write stories, I will often start with a huge outline of everything I want to accomplish, and then I will come back to that and I'll talk about individual chapters and what needs to be accomplished in those chapters. So I seem to do this with most of my work. I seem to dissect things into different pieces. This might sound like I make very little progress on anything, but the reality is that most of my life is bouncing back and forth between things. So I might start a page like this, and I'll get all the ink on it, and then I'll jump onto my computer and I'll script something for a little while, and then I'll go upstairs and I'll clean the kitchen, and then I'll go work out, and then I'll come back and I'll start the brush pen on this, and then I'll jump over after a 3-minute break and another cup of coffee, which is maybe my 7th, and I'll start doing some more editing, or I'll script something. And I just do this. I work for maybe half an hour to hour increments all day long and just bounce back and forth until, it's been about an 8 or a 9 hour day, and then I kind of try to force myself to take a break. So I'm really fortunate that this is the life that I have, that I get to live this way. Also, it's just always been this. I've never been able to just sit down and work on something for 4 to 6 hours at a go, because my attention span just starts slowly gnawing at me from the inside. And when I taught, this was pretty easy because classes were around 50 minutes to an hour. And so you'd have a little break, a 5-minute, 7-minute break, teach for an hour, 5 to 7 minute break, teach for an hour. Then you might have an hour off, which is a total mental reboot. So that schedule worked out pretty well for me too. And as you could imagine, many of you probably are in school of some kind. It was like that in middle school, high school, college. And so my whole life has been built on this idea of bouncing back and forth between things for no more usually than about an hour. And I think that there's some virtues to this. There's also probably some of you that are listening that are pulling your hair out because you sit and do the same thing all day long. And maybe you've chosen to do that and maybe you haven't. But even when I've had jobs where I've had to sit and work for, an 8-hour day solid on the exact same task, I have always tried to get up and move. I've always tried to do things with my breaks during the day. Hopefully you get more than one break. But even like if you work at an office job and you work 8 or 9 hour days, chances are that you have a lunch in the middle and you have little breaks here and there. And so you can break that up, and you need to break that up. Otherwise life just gets ridiculous and it's really, really difficult. So I actually have some videos that'll be coming out in the next couple weeks about the importance of exercise, the importance of getting outside, the importance of moving as an artist. And part of it is because we often plop ourselves for very long periods of time in front of a computer doing something, or in front of a sketchbook and doing something. And it's great. We accomplish a lot. But as you guys get older, your bodies start falling apart. I'm in this stage where I'm in my mid-30s, and if I sit incorrectly for a couple hours, or if I sleep wrong for half an hour, my shoulder or my back hurts for a week. And it's not fun. Would not recommend that aspect of getting older, though I would recommend getting older. The benefits so far have vastly outweighed the deficits. But I have this habit of just bouncing back and forth between things. And so if that's you, don't feel bad about it, because there's a lot of lovely benefits to bouncing back and forth between things. And watching this drawing coalesce, watching these swords come together and form something interesting is a benefit, because this is only occurring due to the fact that I step away and I come back and I have 6 or 7 or 8 things going simultaneously. It does mean that keeping notes and tracking things is probably a good idea if that's the way that you lean as well. I've got a massive whiteboard in my room and I track things that way, and I've got more sticky notes than I want to admit on my desk at the moment. But this is just how it goes. So some of these have obviously gone to the point where I've colored them almost entirely, and others I'm still going back and I'm working on designs. I suppose this probably happens because some of them were easier for me to latch onto. The shields in particular, which are all 3 drawn at this point, partly because they're fun, partly because I know that they're made of wood, and so it's easy to choose the color, it's easy to choose how I'm going to shade things and start progressing. On these swords, though, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them as I begin working on them. Because of that, I have to sort things out slowly, and so that's part of why I keep going back and forth to the grays and layering things onto the blades, playing with some of the designs, continuing to shade the handles and hilts, because I don't know exactly where I'm going to go with them. And so I'll work on it a little bit, and then I'll bounce around to something else. Like here, where I'm moving over to the magical elements on this blade. I haven't really thought through, and I can pretty much guarantee that I spent about 10 seconds contemplating what color I wanted them to be. I went with fire, And so I'm going to start layering some reds and some oranges and yellows to think about how those things, how the little fiery orbs are affecting everything. I'm leaving the center of them white, so I think the implication there is that they're super, super bright at the center, probably very, very hot, which of course makes no sense for holding a blade that's like on fire, literally, but hey, magic. Magic is, it's like that verse in the Bible, you know, love covers a multitude of sins, and magic covers a multitude of design errors. Though I suppose Brandon Sanderson would have some things to say about that, in particular that the more that the audience knows about the magic that is being utilized, the more that you can get away with things. You don't want things to seem like they're coming out of nowhere. And sometimes you just gotta let the rule of cool come through, because sometimes things that look awesome, your audience will let you get away with a little bit more. So I think that's probably a lot of the designs for weapons and things like that in World of Warcraft. A lot of those designs are creatively fantastic, but they also don't make a ton of sense. Very, very seldom does a weapon look like something that could actually be used as a functional weapon. They're often just gigantic things. Honestly, with the exception of frostmourne, which is really just a large one-handed sword that is sometimes wielded in two hands. I got to watch a video recently of some people actually fabricating frostmourne, and the finished size of it was surprising to me. It was far smaller than I expected. It's possible they did this because they didn't want it to look like they didn't want it to be something that was not able to be used. They wanted it to be something that was more practical, but still, I was kind of surprised because most of the weapons in World of Warcraft are pretty ridiculous. I'm thinking about a sword from original World of Warcraft called Zinrock, the Destroyer of Worlds, if I'm not mistaken. And it was just this gargantuan, massive two-handed sword. I always wanted it. I never got it on my hunter, but I did that raid so many times. I think it was from Hakar, the Soul Flare in Zul'Gurub, if I'm remembering all those pieces correctly. I did that raid so many times on my hunter that I was exalted, which is the highest level of reputation you can have with a faction with that group, which was ridiculous. But original World of Warcraft, when it was out, I had a lot of time to play. That was probably after high school, so it would have been maybe 2007, 2008. That time period there is when I started playing, and I just had a lot of time on my hands back then, so I could play things constantly. And a lot of my design sensibilities, a lot of the things I think about when I'm world building or when I'm designing weapons like this comes from those times, from the times where I spent playing lots and lots of video games. I'm 36 now. I have time to play video games, but I also have a lot of other things to put time into. I've got books that I want to write, I have art that I want to make, and I've got artistic skills that I feel like I desperately need to have. I have a daughter and I have a wife. I have a home. I have giant dogs and chickens. We sold our flock of sheep, but at one point we had sheep, and I've, in the past couple years, had gigantic gardens, though my garden kind of went to crap this year. I have other things, and so while I still play video games, a lot of my visual memory comes from things ages ago. So I'm pulling bits and pieces from books I read back when I could read a book a week, and video games when I could play 30 hours a week of video games. Nowadays, I try to limit my playing to only after everyone else in the house has gone to sleep, because that way I'm not missing out on time with my child or time with my wife, people that I love spending time with. I do still delve into things. I've played Elden Ring maybe 7 times through, and I adore the Monster Hunter games. I played Tears of the Kingdom on release, and I just beat Armored Core 6. But, I mean, when this was recorded, because this will go live in a little bit. But those are awesome games, and they're fun experiences. But I have probably 6 or 7 games that I would like to get to, and I'm choosing to do things like this. I'm choosing to draw. I'm choosing to make videos. And I'm choosing to spend my time in different ways. So I go back to these things in my mind, and I find these moments and these games and these stories from my youth, and I pull from them. So ironically, if you are younger right now, if you're in high school or you're in college, there's a lot of things that you need to be thinking about and considering. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you should go play a ton of video games because you won't have time later. But I do kind of want you to be aware that that's probably the case. And also, what's the case is if you want to travel, if you want to go do things that are crazy and adventuresome, now might be the time to do it. I still get to travel a bit, but it is a difficult and different proposition with a family, and it's often more expensive. You know, if I was 22 and I was going to travel to South America, I'm only paying for me, and my needs are more meager then too. If I go now, it's going to be at the very least my wife and myself, so it's double the cost. And if we take our daughter, it's going to be 50% more than what it would cost if it was just me, if not a whole other person more. This isn't to say that there's anything negative about having the family. It makes my life enriched and far, far better. But the reality is, if you are young, there are things that are far easier for you to do. So if you want to stay up late and play the video games, sometimes that might be the right decision. If you want to go out and adventure, I can guarantee that that is likely going to be the best decision. Adventure when you're young. Do things that are a little out of your comfort zone and go visit places you've never been. Try these things. And it becomes this visual repertoire that you can go back into. You can go back into things you did 10, 15, 20 years ago and find, oh, I really liked that element in this video game. I liked that element in this movie. I like that element in this book. I'm really happy that I took the time to visit Australia. This might seem really detached and strange from all the swords that I'm drawing, but the point is that if you're listening to this, you probably have some creative drive. You probably have things that you want to do. And maybe it's that you just, being used in a non-condescending way, but maybe it's that you just want to draw pretty things. If that's the case, the more things you do, the more things you experience in the life, the more things you experience in your life, the larger your visual memory is. The more things you can go back to in your brain and find them and augment the things that you're drawing and painting. If, however, you have the desire to tell stories, to write a book, to make a graphic novel, maybe even make something as daunting as a video game, you are going to need a lot of life experiences. And all of those things have storytelling elements in them as well, which means the more life you live, the more stories you have to tell about your life, the more stories you hear from old people in your world, the more things you'll have to throw out there. The more movies you watch, the more books you read, the more video games you play, all of that will coalesce to form a symbiotic relationship with your subconscious mind that sits there and creates things at 2 a.m. That portion of you needs to be robust to tell stories, to build worlds. So when you're young, it's easier to allocate the time. I spent probably 20 to 30 hours a week playing video games when I was younger. Now, a lot of that was also hanging out with friends, talking to people online if I was playing World of Warcraft, or literally all conglomerating at a friend's home if we were playing things like Halo. That time, I now look at and I treasure the fact that I did it. I don't look back nostalgically and want to do it again. I don't have any desire to relive the glory days. But I certainly am happy that I spent that time then, and I'm happy that I'm spending my time differently now. It's complicated. Getting older is strange. You do sometimes yearn for things that you had when you were younger. Mostly I yearn for not having medical issues and pain that were just so out of left field, just these things that didn't occur to me when I was younger. But there are beautiful things about whatever point in life you find yourself. If you are older, like me, then you have the wisdom and the experience of a life lived, hopefully. And if you're younger, then you still have the ability to build the repertoire for everything you want to do in the future. So either way, take advantage of where you are. Take advantage of the unique traits of where you are in life. Whatever it is that you want to do years down the line, now is the best time to start. I was just talking to a friend maybe last night, and they were talking about all these things they're excited to do, the stories they want to write, the animations they want to create, perhaps the video games that they want to get into at some point. And my teeny piece of advice for them was, there's no time like the present, that you have to start now, because you always are going to have to start at some point. And so why not start now? Why not start hashing it out, start brainstorming, start outlining, start putting things together? If you have something in your life that has been eating at you for ages, something that you want to make, something that you want to tell, start now and try to give yourself some grace and realize that it does not have to be good. I was going to say it doesn't have to be perfect, but it doesn't even have to be good. Most things aren't going to be good as we start to lay them out. You just have to start. I came up with the idea for a novel that I wanted to write in 2001. I started writing things, I started sketching stuff, and I've been picking at it for ages. I've been just not ignoring it, but I've been just touching on little snippets of things every once in a while. I have dozens of recordings in my phone. I have little notes everywhere over the course of the last 20 some odd years. And I'm just now sitting down and really pulling the thing apart and making something with it. It's easy for me to go back and be upset with my past self. Like, why didn't you do this? Like, we've made so much progress in the last couple months. Like, why didn't you attack this earlier? But that's totally pointless. It's purposeless. And so I'm in a situation now where I'm just trying to be happy with the fact that I'm making progress, that things are happening, that it's going somewhere, and that even for the last 60 days, I've managed to just continue to push at it. So I would encourage you to do the same. Don't beat up your old self for having not dived in earlier. Just start now. Push forward and start to accomplish what you want to. And understand it's not going to be good at first. And if you can go into it without the pressure of feeling like it needs to be or should be good at first, you'll probably be able to stick to it a lot longer. And the secret here is, the longer you do it, the better it'll get. And at some point, it will probably be good. Something you can be proud of. But be proud of yourself in the moment for sticking to it and for moving forward. Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.